think tonight might be a little bit shorter. One is a shorter passage, and two, I'm a little bit bushed. I did a 50 miler on the bike today.
Whoa.
So,
Why?
what's that?
Why?
Why?
Why? I don't know. I've been riding it started before COVID, then COVID hit, and it was just a way to keep everybody busy and active and healthy and get out of the house and in nature and all of that. And so, it's, but then I'm in a distance challenge with Alex Oseguera. And so we're seeing who can go more miles. The answer is actually going to be me. If we were running, he would beat me, but riding, I can do that quite a ways. Anyway, I'm a little bit.
How do you prove it though? Does he take your word for it that it was 50 miles?
No, there's an app that will track you. You push start and it uses your GPS location and it charts them. It's actually pretty cool. So I rode all the way to the ship channel and back.
Wow.
Wow.
50 miles.
On what surface?
You
weren't riding on the Beltway, were you?
So it's Blaise Bayou. Blaise Bayou goes all the way over there. So it starts. So right by my house, it's Keegan's.
Mm-hmm.
And so I hop on that, and then it turns into Blaise, and you take Blaise all the way down.
Wow.
So
they were setting that up, but I didn't know. I don't ever get out and walk on it, so I didn't.
It's not 100% finished. Like at a certain point, you got to hop you have to kind of go back and forth because they have this side done and not that. It's anyway. It was a whole thing.
So it was like 25 miles that way and 25 back.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I did that when I was 17. I did a 50 miler in 2.5 hours, and this one was 3.5 hours. But I'm feeling it for sure. So I'm not as young as I once was, sadly.
Yeah, we all.
Wow, is that a real telephone ringing?
Yes, it is, and it's unavailable, I'm sure. But
I have not heard one of those in years. Emily, that is what a real telephone sounds like.
They probably are concerned about your car warranty.
Emily and I were watching The Matrix a couple years ago, and the show is really advanced on the one hand and really dated on the other hand. And so I don't know if you've seen the movie or not, but they've got to get to these. They can basically put themselves in a computer via a phone line, but it has to be a landline. And at one point in the movie, she looks at me, she goes, "What's a landline?" I pushed pause. I said, "We used to have these telephones that were attached to the wall, and you couldn't just walk everywhere."
I still have one of those on my kitchen wall. I mean, the connection where you plug the phone in.
Yeah. She will never know the pain of dial-up. There it is, Emily. See, it's on the wall.
right up there.
Just regular buttons.
I just saw some pictures from Carol Hernandez. Her family went to Arizona, and there was a museum there, and it had a payphone on the wall, and her boys were trying to figure out how you dial with that.
That's funny. Yeah, kids these days, they'll never know the pain of dial-up internet.
Right. That is painful.
We used to go to my grandparents, and the kids would go up to the corner and call our house to see if anyone was there because there was a payphone there.
Yeah. You can't even find a payphone
anymore.
anymore these days.
I don't think they do.
Yeah. Hey, Raj, welcome to the meeting. We're just talking about history of phones, apparently.
Hello.
All right, let me open up our text here. So we're in chapter 11, so we have this week and one more week. So I'll just go ahead and read here. It says, "Cast your bread upon the waters, for you will find it after many days. Give a portion to 7, or even to 8, for you know not what disaster may happen on earth. If the clouds are full of rain, they empty themselves on the earth, and if the tree falls to the south or to the north, in the place where the tree falls, there it will lie. He who observes the wind will not sow, and he who regards the clouds will not reap. As you do not know the way the spirit comes into the bones, into the womb of a woman with a child, so you do not know the work of God who makes everything. In the morning sow your seed, and at evening withhold not your hand, for you do not know which will prosper, this or that, or whether both alike will be good. Light is sweet, and it is pleasant to the eyes to see the sun. So if a person lives many years, let him rejoice in all of them, but let him remember that the days of darkness will be many. All that comes is vanity. Rejoice, O young man, in your youth, and let your heart cheer you in the days of your youth. Walk in the ways of your heart and in the sight of your eyes, but know that for all of these things God will bring you into judgment. Remove vexation from your heart and put away pain from your body, for youth and the dawn of life are vanity. And I'll also include verse 1 here. It says, remember also the Creator in the days of your youth, before the evil days come and the years draw near, of which you will say, I have no pleasure in them. So in the portion of the day, he kind of, before he had been dealing in kind of chunks where he would say, here's something I want to look at. I'm describing it. Now I'm going to tell you how I feel about all the whole experience. And this is kind of more along the lines of Proverbs. So if you read chapters and chapters of the Proverbs, aside from a couple of the Proverbs, right? Proverbs 31 obviously talks about the Proverbs 31 woman. There are certain Proverbs that do have a complete theme to the chapter, but a lot of times they almost feel kind of random. It might be one verse on child rearing and another on not being lazy, and so this almost has that kind of feel to it. But I do see some continuity. And so these first 4 verses in particular, this might strike us as a bit odd. Some of these examples, it's kind of hard to tell what exactly he's saying, but here's what I think. This phrase, cast your bread on the waters, let me pull up the other verse. So this is actually very similar to Isaiah 32:20. He says, happy are you who sow beside all waters, who let the feet of the ox and the donkey range free. And so if you think of living in the Middle East, it's sort of like the sand is ocean. You can't go out into the desert without, just like if you were on a boat, you would prepare for your journey, you would bring water, you'd bring food, you would know how many days you have to go to cross the ocean. The desert is just that way, right? So the cities are like the land, and the sand is like the ocean. And so to be beside the waters is an important thing. It's a sign of kind of being home. So if you think of Psalm 23, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He leads me beside still waters. But again, think of the context, right? For us, we live in a floodplain here in Houston, and so many times we think, please, no more rain, no more water. There's water in the air. There's water on the ground. There's just water everywhere here. So we don't really appreciate it. But if you are in the desert, being led beside waters is really important. And so obviously having the valley, having the water, the watered land to sow in is an important thing. So this verse in Isaiah, happy are you who sow beside all the water, and let the feet of the ox and the donkey range free. And so this is describing kind of an idyllic farm and ranch lifestyle, right? Where you can plant your crops right where they're going to grow. Your ox and your donkey, they have room to just grow and to roam the range and that kind of thing. I don't know if you've ever seen people who try to have like a little farm and ranch on 5 acres or 2 acres or something like that, and they've got a cow and a horse and all these, and everything's just cramped, right? That's not this verse. This verse says he's got a piece of bottom land where he can sow in that nice, rich, silty soil that the river brings in. Okay, so think of this verse now as we go back to that. Cast your bread on the water, for you will find it after many days. This section right here has a lot to do with generosity and risk. So this is an expression that he's saying, cast your bread on the water, that doesn't maybe make a lot of sense, but if you think of it metaphorically, if the bread is our resources, our energy, our time, our whatever, and we're throwing it out there, kind of like people who sit on the beach and they throw a bottle into the water and then the water brings it back in at some point. Okay, so the throwing it out there then is this spirit of generosity or this spirit of risk. And this is what he's saying in verse 2, give a portion to 7 or 8. So give your stuff away, with the follow-up line of, you don't know what disaster may happen on earth. So he's kind of putting, on the one hand, there's the virtue of generosity and taking risk and being hopeful that God might do something with what we're doing. And the vice, the opposite of that, is keeping it, being stingy, not trying anything. We could look at the New Testament and think of the parable of the man who's going away to be made king, and he gave his servants various talents. A talent is a measurement of money, and he expected them to do what was at that time risky business. So in the context of that story, he was not a loved king. They sent a delegation after him, trying to make sure that he would not come back and be their king. And in this context, when he does come back now as a newly crowned king, he asks his servants to basically, hey, show me the books. Let's see what you've done. And so you can imagine, like right now, whether you love Trump or hate Trump, whether you love the opposition or hate the opposition, just imagine being in the enemy's territory and then setting up a sign with whoever the person is that they hate, right? Imagine, being right in the middle of one of the protests downtown, in any of the downtown areas across the country, and have a big booth that says, Trump for president or something like that. That would be that'd be a pretty scary thing. And so that's what this man asked his people to do, is I'm giving you this money, go do business in my name. And now he's come back, and the question is, what have you done? And so there's the one who is given 5 and he's doubled it. There's the one who's given 3 and he added to it. And there's the one who's given 1 and he buried it in the ground. And so in this case, there's zero, in the case of the third servant, there was 0 risk taken, and he is the one that the master is angry with. And so verse 2 could be a way, the second line of verse 2, you don't know what disaster may happen on earth. This is kind of a way of saying you can't take it with you when you go, right? So give a portion to 7 or even to 8. He's talking about 7 or 8 people, because you can't take it with you when you go. So these first 2 verses, he is extolling the virtue of generosity and basically stepping out on faith for God with your resources. And then in verse 3 and 4, he flips it on its head. He discusses the opposite. He says, if the clouds are full of rain, they empty themselves on the earth. So, this is kind of a bridge between those 2 ideas. So you imagine a cloud, it looks really full, it starts raining, and it seems to be empty, but then the next day, the water cycles happened, it's evaporated, and you have another cloud again. And so we often think that what we have is this one time only, it's all or nothing kind of moment. And so let's save what we have, and let's not take a risk. But that's not what he's saying here at all. He's saying we should take the risk, because the cloud is full of rain one day, it dumps it on the ground. Hey, guess what? The next day, it fills up again. And verse 4, he drives this home even more. So he says, he who observes the wind will not sow, and he who regards the clouds will not reap. He also says this in Proverbs, that the sluggard looks out his window and doesn't work for the sight of the rain. This is an important thing. So on the one hand, casting your bread on the water because you don't know what will happen, and I think that's a hopeful, like, who knows what could happen? Anything could happen. Is in direct contrast to this verse, number 4. This is the opposite. This is, you're thinking about doing something and you look at the situation, you go, nah, it's not really favorable conditions. I'm not going to plant today because look at that big cloud out there. And so that's obviously, if you're in any kind of, ever had a garden or lived in a farming community, you can't not plant when it's planting time. If you don't plant when it's planting time, you don't have a crop. And if you don't go out and reap the harvest because of the clouds, that's the second line of verse 4, he who regards the clouds will not reap. So if I go, oh man, if it's a good day, I'll go out and reap. But if it's a bad day, I'm not going to go out and reap. Well, every time you see a cloud, you're going to go, no, I can't go out and reap. And so he's basically saying if you're the kind of person who's looking for everything to be right before you'll take that step, you're always going to be waiting for that moment. It's never going to look right. Someone was asking me the other day about parenthood and how to prepare for parenthood. And I said, there's some good books, and there's some good teachings out there. But the reality is nothing prepares you for parenthood except for parenthood, right? It's one of if you wait until you're prepared and ready and all of your ducks are in a row, you'll never have kids. You'll never, it just won't happen. So you just, you get married, you take the plunge, you have a kid, and then now you're ready. Ready or not, here you go. So he kind of firms this up in verse 5, and this reminds me of how Job talks. He says, as you do not know the way that a spirit comes into the bone, into the womb. To me, this is very awkward wording. Basically, he's saying you don't know how life comes into a baby. So if you can't understand that, how do you think you're going to understand the work of God who makes everything? That's a pretty basic thing. I mean, by contrast of God making everything is just the cycle of life. And so he's saying, look, if you don't even know this, how do you expect to know what God is doing with the whole world? And so the obvious answer is, well, we can't. So this is similar to Job, where Job, he's been going round and round with his three friends who are trying to explain to him why God has let him suffer in such a hard way. And then when you read towards the end of the book and God starts conversing with him, it's a little bit frightening, awe-inspiring, humbling, just all of these different things. And God asks him questions like, were you there when I made the heavens? Can you tell me how much water is in the ocean? And it's just question after question, of things that Job has no way of knowing. And so obviously the answer is no, I wasn't there. No, I don't know. And the idea is God's trying to bring him to the realization, my ways are higher than your ways. Okay. Now that seems like a weird verse to just throw in the middle, right? So we're talking about generosity. Now we're talking about don't, sit around and sit on your hands, be active. And now all of a sudden it's because you don't even know where a baby comes from. So you don't know what's going to happen. And then he goes kind of back into his talk about farming. Verse 6, in the morning, sow your seed, and at evening, withhold not your hand, for you do not know which will prosper, this or that, whether both alike will be good. And so immediately he's going back into there. So his justification for you should be trying. You see, when we read the book is all about vanity, vanity. Everything is vanity. And it can lead you into cynicism, right? To go, well, if everything is vanity, why try? You know what? If I'm going to plant the garden this year and I'm going to reap it and I'm going to eat it and then it's going to be gone and I'm going to be hungry again and I'm going to have to plant it and harvest and plant and harvest, why try? And he's saying, yes, do it. If trying to build wealth, another person's going to take it. If trying to make a name for myself, if all of these things are vanity, why do anything at all? Why not just be lazy? And for whatever reason, Solomon is saying that's not the right approach. Yes, these things are burdensome. Yes, there is this drudgery to life that he calls vanity. At the same time, he's saying it's part of our life. It's part of what makes everything happen, what makes everything go round, and what makes us tick. Part of that is us being willing to plant that seed and wait for it to grow and just see what God does. Again, this is a concept that gets brought into the parables of Jesus. Jesus talks about, a farmer goes out and he plants a seed and he doesn't, he goes to sleep, he wakes up in the morning and it's grown and he doesn't know from where. And so many things in our life are like this. I was interviewing a girl from Hong Kong who's a missionary to Muslims in Vancouver, Canada. And she was talking about how we one word you hear so often is the word intentionality. Live with intentionality. Where, choose where you live, choose the job you live, choose how you spend your time, all of these things, intentionality. And I think she's right. And neither of us were saying that was wrong. But sometimes we think, well, if I'm intentional, then all of this stuff will happen. I'll reach my neighbors, my, revival will come. All these things will happen. And her story was all about the thing that happened when she wasn't paying attention at all. She got in a taxi ride or something and met somebody, and all of a sudden there's this really great conversation. But her point was, in spite of intentionality, God does things to us. They feel random, right? I'm being so intentional over here, and then out of the blue over here, poof, God does something amazing. He drops something in our lap. Now, that's not to say don't be intentional, because look at verse 6. In the morning, sow your seed. There's an intentionality to farming. There still is this component that we can't control. We can't control the rains. We can't control just the fact that a dead seed with a little bit of water and heat, soaks it in, bursts, and comes to life. Like, we can't, it almost seems like a mystical process, and we have no control over it. But there is intentionality to farming, but there also is this component that God blesses the farmer's actions and it produces crops. And so with all of our life, we should have intentionality. So sure, there's days where I think, man, I earn a paycheck. The moment I get that paycheck, it's already pre-designated to all of these bills, and then I have to get another paycheck. And then that one. And so there's this drudgery of that whole, earning money to it just going out the window cycle. But that shouldn't lead us to despair. It should lead us to verse 6, which says, in the morning, sow your seed. Like that's what we're here for. Sometimes we want to hold back from serving God until it makes sense. And that's problematic. We have to serve God whether it makes sense or not. If you look at the many crazy things he's asked his people to do over the years, they don't make sense. In fact, many times he sends, in the time of the prophets, he sends Isaiah and Jeremiah. He says, I'm going to send you to these people, and I am going to harden their hearts so that they won't hear you. And the efficient American in me goes, well, why are you sending them in there then? If you want to judge them, just judge them. It doesn't make any sense. You're sending him on a fool's errand. Moses goes to Pharaoh and he says, I'm going to harden Pharaoh's hearts. Well, why are you sending Moses in there? Just harden his heart to, judge Egypt, be done with it. But for whatever reason, that's not how God works. And so many times God tells us to do things that we don't comprehend how it makes sense. But remember, verse 5, we don't even know how the spirit, that non-material part of the human being, comes into a baby in the womb. We don't even understand that. So how can we know all of God's purposes? And so instead of waiting till we understand, we have to go, okay, I don't understand, but God, you called me to plant seeds. I'm going to plant the seed. And I don't know what that is for each of us, but there's something that God wants us to do that if we wait until we understand, we're like the person in verse 4, we're looking at the clouds and waiting for a break in the rain before we go harvest. But Solomon in verse 6 would say, nope, get out there and sow your seed in the morning, because that's when you're supposed to do it. Martin Luther, the reformer, not King Jr., in the Reformation, he talked about the end times, and he said, if I knew that Jesus were coming back tomorrow, I would plant a tree and pay my bills. And you go, well, if Jesus comes back tomorrow and takes you out of this world, why would you pay your bills today? That doesn't make any sense. And his whole thing is, well, God calls us to be obedient, whether or not it makes any sense. And so if your assignment in life from God is to be a tree planter, even though planting a tree takes, years and years and years for it to become a tree, a full tree, if that's what he's called you to do, you should go and do it, even if he's coming back tomorrow. It doesn't matter. And so remember, this is Solomon reflecting back on his life, I think. And so, this is kind of the encouragement to finish strong. There might be times in our life where we think, well, what is the purpose of continuing learning? What is the purpose of continuing growing in our discipleship, in our sanctification? Because, at some point, we're all going to die. And so, after a certain point, it would be easy to say, well, I've got what I can. I'm good enough. I'm far enough. I've learned enough. And so I don't understand. But that's the whole thing. If this is who God has called us to be, we should be that person, even if tonight is our last night. It doesn't matter. So in verse 8, he talks about this. He says, if a person lives many years, let him rejoice in them all, but let him also remember that the days of darkness will be many. All that comes is vanity. So here you see him playing back and forth with the ideas of so much of life is meaningless, but so much of life is good. And so he would say it's wrong to take the approach where it's all one thing or all the other thing. You wouldn't want to say, well, everything in life is going to be great, because obviously that's going to lead you to huge disappointment. But you also don't want to take that cynical, everything is going to be terrible kind of approach, because that's also not true. Even people in prison or even people in poverty can enjoy a sunrise, right? That's what he says in verse 7. Light is sweet and it's pleasant for the eyes to see the sun. The poorest man in the world can see a sunrise. And so, sure, his poverty probably feels like a burden, but the sunrise is beautiful. And so life is not just one thing. It's not all black, and it's not all darkness and sadness, but it's also not all happiness and fun. And so we have to, with a mature way, look at life and go, we're going to get both of these. When Job's friends were coming after him, they wanted him, they struggle with this idea. In their mind, you're good and God gives you good things, or you're bad and God gives you bad things. It's this or it's that. And he said, I've received good from God. Should I not also receive bad from God? And there's so many people who have this view of themselves that I should never suffer. I should never be sad. I should never be uncomfortable. This is a very inflated view of who we are and what we deserve. The reality is, the results of the fall in the world, God judging us, God growing us through perseverance and hard times, we should expect these things to come. And so we shouldn't have this kind of Pollyanna view that, well, everything is just going to work out fine, because we know that that's not reality. On the other hand, everything is just going to be bad and terrible. That's also not reality. There are both sides of this in life. And so here he gives 5 command words. Okay, rejoice, walk, know, remove, and remember. So he says, starting in verse 9, he says, rejoice, O young man, in your youth, and let your heart cheer you in the days of your youth. So there should be times of gladness in what we have. Now, this is ironic, and he's about to talk about the vanity of youth. At the same time, there is the rejoicing. People should enjoy it. I remember when I was a kid, and probably everybody's this way, I was 12 and I wanted to be 15. I was 15 and I wanted to be 18. I was 18 and I wanted to be 21. Now I'm 39 and I wish I could go back to 20. But, during that time of youth, the only thing I could focus on was, man, when I could get my driver's license, man, when I can own my own gun, man, when I can, it was always what is next. And I always tell my kids, hey, enjoy this moment. They were probably thinking the same thing I'm thinking, which is, I can't wait to drive. I can't wait to do this. I can't wait to do that. So on the one hand, youth is such a fleeting thing. On the other hand, it is a beautiful time. I see Jack and Benjamin and the kids just playing games and enjoying a watermelon or enjoying whatever. You've all seen kids do this where they just, it doesn't matter what else is going on in the world. The world's going crazy, but they've got that thing and they are just having a ball with it. And so there is cause for rejoicing. The second command he gives is walk in the ways of your heart and in the sight of your eyes. Now, this one comes with, this is like a carrot and a stick all in one. He says, but know that for all these things, God will bring you into judgment. So it has a flip side to this one. But there is a sense in which what we are seeing and what we are experiencing, we should be kind of all in right there. Verse 10, he says, remove vexation from your heart and put away pain from your body. For youth and the dawn of life are vanity. So at first, hey, rejoice in your youth. Now he's saying, but it is actually vanity. And that's true. Youth is very fleeting. And with youth, just bodily functionality, strength, endurance, all those kind of youthful characteristics, they're great when you've got them, but at some point, either just through injury or time, all of those, fade to the back. And then again, think of him as an older man thinking back on his younger self. And so he's talking about, enjoy your youth, but also, hey, don't put all your hope in youth because youth is fleeting. Our culture likes to reject this idea. We're always looking for ways to look younger, feel younger, act younger. And so that's where he would say, hey, youth and the dawn of life are vanity because there's no slowing down time. It rolls the same for all of us. And then verse 12, and we'll close with this one. He says, remember the Creator in the days of your youth before the evil days come and your years draw near in which you will say, I have no pleasure in them. Again, I think this is a very confessional verse for him where this is him, right? So if you think of Solomon and his life, he starts off this young, wise king that wants God's wisdom. He's not wanting wealth and riches. Over time, he does all of the things that a good king should not do, and God judges him quite severely for this by the end of his life. And so you can kind of see this being his trajectory in his life. And there seems to be a time in our lives where we're willing to hope and believe and accept. And for many people, we probably all know someone in our life that is past that point, and belief seems ridiculous to them, and hope is naive to them, and faith is just absurd to them. But if you talk with a child and say, well, someone made you. Who made you? Oh, mommy and daddy. Okay, who made them? Well, their mommy. Okay, go all the way back. Who made that person? Well, there must be something else. There must be someone else that made us all, right? That just makes sense on a human level. But then go down life some, and people reach a certain age where they go, you know what? These bad things have happened to me. Thus, I think there is no God. And so Solomon's admonition is, remember the Creator in the days of your youth. Because he sees time coming where we will see everything as vanity or not find pleasure in those things.